Hey everyone, it's Sunday and time for Storytime. Today, my special guest is Diego. And Diego is a jeweled Lacerta, sometimes called an ocellated lizard or an eyed lizard. So these guys are mainly found in Spain. They were once becoming close to endangered, but they've been reintroduced into Spain and are starting to re-establish a lot of their former habitat. They're known for living in rocky kind of areas, on the edges of woodlands, rocky outcrops, savanna type stuff. And the reason that they start to disappear is because people will start to build homes in those areas, and then unfortunately the lizard doesn't have a place to live anymore. But because we started to recognize that the lizard was losing some of its habitat, we were able to restore some extra places for it, and then we were able to start putting him back out where he belongs. Now, I know he's a boy and not a girl because of all this beautiful color on him. So in the animal world, sometimes males are brightly colored, sometimes females are brightly colored. It depends on the animal. For the most part, males have to attract females. We see that a lot in birds and we see it a lot in reptiles. So normally, it's going to be our male ones that are very, very brightly colored. So these guys get the name jeweled Lacerta because they literally look like a bunch of brightly colored jewels. They've got the bright oranges and greens, and sometimes they'll even have yellows and sometimes even oranges in there. So they basically look like they're shining jewels, especially when they're sitting out in the sun, getting warm and soaking up some UVB radiation. Primarily, these guys like to eat insects, and they're very, very fast on the ground. So sometimes they'll hang out up on rocks so they can look down and they can see the insects, and then they can dive down really quick and grab them and munch them up with these very, very powerful jaws. Oh, I'm sorry, buddy. They're not known for biting, but he definitely didn't like me touching his jaw. But as you can see, there's a lot of muscle in there, so they can chomp down very hard. Sometimes they're known for eating small animals, like they might eat some mice or moles or things like that. But they're primarily known for eating insects. You can see I'm trying to calm him down. He's closing his eyes now. So most reptiles are born with what's called a pineal eye. It's got a couple different names, but you can see there's this odd colored scale right there. So primitive reptiles had a third eyeball on top of their head, and it functioned like a normal eye. It mainly just sees shadow movements. That way they could see if birds or anything, predators were up above. But when they're born, a lot of reptiles still have this eye. So you can see it on bearded dragons and leopard geckos and on Lacertas. But over time, scales grow over top of that eye, and they don't really use it anymore. But because there was an eyeball there, they have lots of nerves. So sometimes when we need to calm our guys down, we just sit there and slowly massage around that area, and I can feel his body loosen up. Sometimes you'll start to close his eyes. There we go. Now he's closing them. He feels a lot better now. So these guys can make pretty good pets. This is about a full-size one, which is usually about 1.5 feet, sometimes up to 2 feet. They can be a little bit squirrely because out in the wild they do like to run a lot, and then like to go hide in rocks and everything. So I don't squeeze him when I hold him. I have him firmly so he doesn't get away from me, but I also give him enough kind of like lax in my hands that if he needs to, he doesn't feel like he's threatened. But I'll just kind of keep going and rubbing on that pineal eye so he can start to try and relax, maybe fall asleep a little. Right, buddy? Diego's a good lizard. So today, I thought we would read Lyle, Crocodile by Bernard Waber. I don't have a crocodile to show you, but I thought Diego here kind of looks like the crocodile in the picture. Can you see the resemblance? So I figured I would read him this book. And you look interested in it. Does that look familiar? That's not you. That's a distant cousin. So we'll go ahead and read Lyle, Crocodile. All right. This is the house on East 88th Street. Mr. and Mrs. Prim and their son Joshua live in the house on East 88th Street. So does Lyle. Listen, swish, swash, splash, sploosh. That's Lyle. Lyle, the crocodile. Lyle was very happy living with the Prim family. He was especially happy when he was being useful, like helping Joshua brush up on schoolwork. But if Lyle was happy, he was making someone else unhappy. Perfectly miserable, in fact. That someone else was Lacerta, Mr. Grump's cat. Mr. Grumps lived just 2 houses away from the Prims. Whenever this cat caught even the slightest glimpse of Lyle, she would fling herself into a nervous fit. Lyle wanted desperately to win Lacerta over. He tried flashing his sweetest, most toothsome smile at her to show he was really friendly, but this only frightened the distrustful animal even more. In the end, Mr. Grumps, who was even more excitable than his cat, would burst from the house shaking an angry fist at Lyle. "Something will have to be done about that crocodile," he shouted as Lyle fled to the safety of his own house. To take his mind off his troubles with Lacerta and Mr. Grumps, Lyle filled his days playing with Joshua and his friends. He loved being it. He would skip double dutch 100 times without missing. It came as no particular surprise that Lyle could high jump, but Lacerta, who was just out for an airing, was surprised. She was terribly surprised. Lacerta was so surprised and so shaken, she fled to the nearest tree, and no amount of coaxing would bring her down. Not till Mr. Grumps arrived to rescue and comfort her would she consider coming down. "Something will have to be done about that crocodile," stormed Mr. Grumps. Now Mr. Grumps was really furious. Now he knew he would be snappy, irritable, and impossible to live with when he returned to his job in a big department store the following day. For the next several days, Mrs. Prim thought it best to keep Lyle close at her side. Together they fussed about the kitchen, preparing good things for the family to eat. When the weather permitted, they took lunch to the park. Lyle was always one for sharing. They even took trips downtown. Oh, I lost my lights. There was much to see in the big city and much to do. Mrs. Prim could spend hours just browsing around the antique shops. Luckily, I have the lights from the reptile tanks. Still makes it easy enough for us to see the photos. Lyle could spend hours watching building construction. They both loved to ice skate. One day, Mrs. Prim and Lyle went shopping in a big department store. Unfortunately for everyone, it turned out to be the very same store in which Mr. Grumps held an important position. And unfortunately, they were to hear from Mr. Grumps all too soon, for it was his voice that suddenly broke in over the loudspeaker to announce a sale in the pajama department. Immediately, it was as if everyone in the store was in desperate need of pajamas. Separated from Mrs. Prim, Lyle was swept along with the crowd. As they neared the pajama department, Lyle thought he heard a familiar voice. "Lyle, Lyle," the voice called out. Lyle recognized the voice all right. And the face as well. The voice and face belonged to Hector P. Valenti, star of stage and screen. But what was Signor Valenti up to now? Well, for the moment, it seemed, he was very busy selling pajamas. Lyle remembered unhappily his days of traveling and performing with Signor Valenti. But in spite of everything, the two were more delighted to see each other than once more. In another part of the store, Mrs. Prim searched frantically for Lyle. "Excuse me," she said to the lady at the information booth. "Have you seen a crocodile going past? He was wearing a red scarf." "No," answered the lady. "I have no information about a crocodile wearing a red scarf." "Excuse me," said Mrs. Prim to the sporting goods salesman. "Have you by chance come across a crocodile? His name is Lyle." "Sorry, madame," answered the salesman. "I have not come across any crocodiles named Lyle today." Mrs. Prim grew more and more upset. "Excuse me," she said to a man wearing a white carnation. I've lost my crocodile and don't know what to do. Whatever the man answered, Mrs. Prim never heard it, and his voice was lost in a chorus of other voices shouting, "More! More!" Those voices belonged to the huge crowd of shoppers surrounding Hector P. Valenti and Lyle. Because they had an audience, and because Signor Valenti had not resist showing off, he had persuaded Lyle to join him in a free performance of their old stage act. "More, more," the surprised but delighted shoppers called out, forgetting all about wanting or even needing pajamas. Mrs. Prim caught up with them just in time to still hear another voice, charged with fury, shout, "What is going on here?" That was Mr. Grumps. And when Mr. Grumps saw what was really going on, his face turned red, blue, and purple with rage. "Madame," he gasped, "we do not permit crocodiles in this store, you know. Remove him at once. And you, sir," he said, pointing a dagger-like finger at Signor Valenti, "you, sir, are dismissed." Something will have to be done about that crocodile. Those warning words of Mr. Grumps still rang in their ears as they said goodbye to Signor Valenti outside the store. Mr. Grumps at last made good his threat to do something about that crocodile. The next day he appeared at the Prim's door with papers authorizing Lyle to be committed to the city zoo. "The zoo!" Mrs. Prim exclaimed miserably. "Whatever would Lyle be doing in the zoo?" "He'll be doing whatever it is normal crocodiles are supposed to be doing," snapped Mr. Grumps, who wasn't being nice about it at all. The Prims examined the papers. They appeared to be in order. There was little they could do, at least for the moment, to prevent Mr. Grumps from putting Lyle in the zoo. Not wanting to seem unsociable, he decided to join the other crocodiles who were cozily piled together. Just when he thought he had gotten himself comfortable on top, he awakened to find himself crushed to the very bottom. Lyle's restlessness so annoyed the other crocodiles that they all just got up and stomped off in a huff. Lyle was happier during the day when visitors came. He amused everyone with his unusual tricks, and before long, he was the biggest attraction at the zoo. Joshua and Mrs. Prim visited regularly, arms laden with games, toys, and the Turkish caviar Lyle loved so much. Mrs. Prim did her best to smile and appear cheerful, but just couldn't hide her concern. "Are you feeling all right, dear?" she would ask. "Are you getting enough rest? Are you making friends with the other crocodiles? Do the lions keep you awake at night? Is the floor too damp? Do the flies pester you?" Lyle shook his head yes or no, depending on the question. He tried putting on a brave front, but Mrs. Prim knew very well he was very unhappy and fought back her tears. One night, a new keeper appeared at Lyle's cage. Surprise, surprise! The new keeper turned out to be none other than Hector P. Valenti, star of stage and screen. "Shh," whispered Signor Valenti. "I have come to rescue you." Signor Valenti unlocked the door of the cage, and astonished Lyle was set free. "You can't go home again," said Signor Valenti when they had put the zoo behind them. Signor Valenti was bursting with ideas. "We'll put our old act together again," he said. "We'll fly to Australia. They'll love us in Australia," Lyle groaned. The very thought of never seeing the house on East 88th Street again was grim indeed, and too much for him to endure. Signor Valenti read his thoughts and decided Lyle should have one last look at the house on East 88th Street. Approaching the now sleeping street, they were suddenly met with a wall of dense smoke. The smoke, they realized with horror, was coming from Mr. Grump's house. While Signor Valenti ran to signal the alarm, Lyle broke into the house and rescued the still sleeping occupants. A gasping, frightened Mr. Grumps and his cat were led to the safety of the street. Now the Prims in the entire neighborhood were awake and witness to Lyle's heroism. Mr. Grumps couldn't thank him enough. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Mr. Grumps to the crowd of onlookers, Lyle is the bravest, kindest, most wonderful crocodile in the world, whole wide world. I would consider it a privilege and pleasure to have him as our neighbor once more. Hooray, shouted the prims. Hooray, shouted the crowd. Lyle moved back to the house on East 88th Street that very night. Several days later, a farewell party was given by the prims for Signor Valenti, who was leaving to seek fortune and adventure in Australia. Remember, said Mr. Grumps, speaking to Signor Valenti, should you change your mind about leaving, a job in my store will always be yours, just for the asking. We need people with your kind of talent and ability. Everyone smiled happily. Even Loretta. So this was a very good story about how even if somebody treats you wrong and tries to do bad things, it is still better to go ahead and do good things for them. Because even though sometimes people might be mean or they might say bad things, deep down maybe sometimes they really do want to be nice, and sometimes it takes just being nice to them. So Lyle was nice to Mr. Grumps and helped him, and then that changed Mr. Grumps' mind about everything. And then Diego here, I think, got startled when the light came back on as Mr. Proust walked through. So, you ready for a close-up? Want to see your handsome face on the camera? He's such a handsome little man. Yes, he is. Oh, there we go. I'll get you to fall asleep. There we go. Nice, relaxed lizard. So, I hope you guys had fun, and I hope you enjoyed the story, and I hope you enjoyed meeting Diego. So, have a good night.